Okay, well, to get us started, first, I just wanted to say hello. Thank you to everyone joining us, either live or later on through the recording that we will upload. Today, we'll be discussing the um, importance of building an education system that supports teachers and parents and identifying the best strategies for data and technology use. And it'll include some great research by CDT as well as some important insight from the Equity Institute. My name is Karen Kwasi, and I'm representing one of the hosting organizations called the Educating All Learners Alliance, or ELA for short, as we often like to call it. So for us, we at ELA, we are a coalition of over 100 alliances, 100 partner organizations that seek to support students with disabilities by curating an extensive resource library and sharing helpful examples and information within the education community. So we are super excited today to be joined by the Center for Democracy and Technology, as well as Equity Institute, to explore this topic. And before I pass it over, I just want to put a quick note. Please feel free to leave in any questions that you may have in the chat, and we'll try to get to them at the end. So that with that being said, I'll pass it over now to Hugh to get us started.
There's the mute button. Hey everyone, hope y'all are doing well. Okay, so I can just give a quick kind of overview of how the discussion is going to go today. But first off, thank you all for joining, and for those who are watching the recording, thank you as well. We're really excited for this conversation. So I am, as I mentioned, I'm Hugh. I am the Research and Communications Associate from the Center for Democracy and Technology. We're going to talk a little bit about like who we are, as well as Carlin and the Equity Institute in a second. We're going to do a quick presentation of some recent research, survey research that CDT, Center for Democracy and Technology, has conducted, and then we're going to use that to kick off just a conversation between me and Carlin and Karen, and then we'll open it up to Q&A and discussion. Let's see. So I introduced myself, but yeah, like I said, I am CDT's Research and Communications Associate. I work on the Equity and Civic Technology project at the Center for Democracy and Technology. No, it's a lot of words. Basically what we do is we work on ensuring that government and public technology is used equitably, responsibly, and with privacy protection at the forefront. A lot of our work has to do with education, education technology, and student privacy protection, which brings us to kind of what we're going to be talking about today. But before we dive in, I'll hand it over to Carlin to give a quick introduction.
Great, thanks, Hugh. So my name is Carlin Howard. I serve as Chief Impact Officer with Equity Institute, as well as co-founder of the organization. We focus particularly on supporting schools and districts, organizations, and building systems that are diverse, equitable, inclusive, anti-racist, with the intention to really center the process of learning that incorporates students' lived experiences, relationships, critical connections. My primary responsibility within the organization, beyond just the nonprofit shenanigans that often happen in terms of management and leadership, is to also oversee our educator pathway program. So I particularly focus on supporting teacher assistants and paraprofessionals more broadly who are interested in getting their educator certification, their bachelor's degree, and then becoming educators with long-term impact.
Awesome, thank you. Cool, I'm looking forward to a conversation. We're going to run through some research pretty quick, and then we're going to get into a little bit of the back and forth. So first off, kind of what we're here to talk about today is looking at kind of the intersection of digital literacy and community engagement, and how community engagement, strong community engagement practices from schools can help build digital literacy in their school communities, both students themselves and their families. And we're also going to be looking at the role that educators play in there. Educators play a really important role. And we're going to take a look at some of our research to see how these relate. So to start off with here, I want to just spend a quick minute talking about what is digital literacy. So we've seen in the past couple of years as schools rely more on school technology and data use for all kinds of different academic and non-academic goals. Students and their families are in need of skills and need skills to engage in those tools and participate in online life productively, safely, and responsibly. And all of those are sort of wrapped up in a skill set that we refer to as digital literacy. I think it's easy to think that, students, younger folks sort of kind of already have all of this knowledge. And there's this idea that they're sort of like, the digitally native generation, and therefore are not in need of like sort of further education instruction of digital literacy. And I think that that's kind of an overly simplistic way to think about it, because I think, there's ways to participate in online life that are, productive, constructive, positive experiences that protect safety. And there's ways to participate that are not those things, that are unsafe or risky or irresponsible. And so digital literacy really kind of lies at the point of making that kind of a safe, productive experience. So what is in there? We list a couple bullet points here. Digital literacy includes basics of internet use. So it's things like, navigating, using search engines, using email, navigating websites. It also includes basics of privacy protection. So things like, how do different services use your data? Why is privacy important? What can be done to sort of further protect your privacy online? Cybersecurity, things like how do you keep your account safe? What are cybersecurity risks that are prevalent in different parts of sort of navigating the internet? How do you browse websites safely and sort of avoid common cyber threats? And that online safety and identity management, this is things like, both at a very nuts and bolts level, like password protection, things like that, which is also kind of cybersecurity. But also, how do you participate responsibly in online communities? How do you, what are the ethics of sort of being in social media, interacting with either people people who are strangers online, all of that. It's sort of a fraught space, and it's really important to equip students who are going to be in those circles with the skills they need to kind of participate safely and responsibly in a way that has their best interests in mind. So all of those things we kind of wrap up into this umbrella of digital literacy. The last thing here that I'll say is that digital literacy is an equity issue. So our team sort of came at this issue initially from the angle of the homework gap, which is, as I'm sure everyone knows, the major disparity in access to internet and internet-enabled technology that exists in the US. And so we sort of one of our sort of main advocacy points is that we want to equip students so that when they do come online, when they do sort of are provided with access to participate in online life, they're able to do so safely and really reap the most out of that opportunity. And for those who have recently come online and may not have sort of the privilege of having kind of like a longer term online presence, some of these skills may be new, and schools play a really important role in providing that kind of background and instruction. So this is kind of where community engagement comes in. Educators can play an important role in building digital literacy in school community. And we sort of look at this through the angle of ways that they can kind of engage students and their families. There's a range of ways this can look like. This includes kind of having conversations with students and families about digital literacy, privacy protection, things like that, as well as sharing resources, answering questions, and integrating digital literacy into a classroom curriculum. Community engagement can also help educators and other school staff understand the needs of school communities and amplify community knowledge. And so what I mean by that is different school communities come at online activity with different needs, whether it's needing kind of digital literacy materials presented in the language that is predominant there, making sure those are translated into relevant languages and not just in English if that presents a barrier, making sure language is easily accessible and information, the ways to access the information is easily navigable. All of these are really important. And then lastly, I note here that community engagement can inform school technology decisions. It's critical for both teachers and other school staff to sort of be hearing the needs and engaging actively, proactively with community members to inform what technology makes the most sense for the school community and how can that be designed in a way that centers students and their families. So it's kind of a long preamble. Also, I should mention I'm recovering from a cold, unfortunately, so I apologize if I sound a little bit like a frog, but it sounds worse than it is, so I do apologize though. Okay, so I'm gonna go through this pretty quick. We looked at community engagement and digital literacy specifically through the lens of students with disabilities and their experience. This is our work has sort of emphasized the role of students with disabilities for through a range of our different work streams, and we're really interested in seeing how do these students and their families participate and sort of what role do they play in conversations about community engagement and digital literacy. And our research found some really positive points. This is based on polling research that we did in 2021 of teachers and parents. And we found that teachers and parents of students with disabilities really led on a lot of positive community engagement practices. We present some data here showing a couple of common sort of measures of community engagement. These are kind of data that teachers report out on. Teachers of students with disabilities, teachers with special education backgrounds report more frequent conversations about student privacy with their students, as well as report that both students and parents were more likely to ask questions about student privacy and other aspects of digital literacy than other teachers were. So we really found that both in terms of proactively sharing this kind of information, as well as sort of responding to conversations initiated by students and parents, teachers of students with disabilities really led on some of these positive practices. So, and then kind of looking a little bit more broadly about how, beyond just sort of the teacher's role, how are schools supporting families with students with disabilities across measures of community engagement. And again, here we found that parents of students with disabilities are more equipped to promote responsible data use practices and other elements of digital literacy than other parents. We kind of show here parents of students with disabilities are more likely to feel prepared to educate their children about responsible online practices, as well as give feedback and participate in school technology decisions than other parents. So kind of combined with the findings that we looked at in the last slide, these sort of suggest that community engagement really can meaningfully contribute to greater digital literacy within the school community. So kind of to zoom out for a second here, I think what our findings suggest is that when you have a strong kind of atmosphere of community engagement centered around digital literacy that the school proactively promotes and implements through its programming, that can really foster stronger digital literacy practices both in its students and their families, which translates to safer and more productive online experiences for that community. What can other educators learn from this? Because we note that teachers of students with disabilities really kind of lead the way in a lot of these practices, schools that can find a way to like amplify this good work can really use the lessons learned here to increase privacy protection capacity across the board. A couple kind of key points here I highlight are understanding how digital platforms work and how various different ed tech tools or other digital tools impact student privacy. Schools can facilitate conversations between across the teacher body and between teachers and parents. And then last, engage families to better understand technology needs, as we talked about beforehand. We get into all of this in greater depth in a report that we put out recently, and we can drop a link to that shortly. Anyway, that was a little bit of a whirlwind here, so I'm going to pause and step back. I'm going to stop sharing a screen, and I think we can kind of kick it off into a conversation.
Yes, I'd love to jump in and get some feedback from the Equity Institute. So I know with your organization, you're committed to developing and implementing innovative solutions to build more diverse, equitable, and inclusive learning environments, and professional as well. And you work closely with educators through your teacher prep programs. So have you noticed what have you noticed throughout your work in terms of tech and data usage with the educators that you've worked alongside with in your prep programs?
No, thank you for that question. And Hugh, thank you for the overview of the research and findings that y'all have. When it comes to our program, and I don't think our program is too, in terms of our emphasis on digital literacy, is too different from many other educator prep programs. One of the challenges is that there's often an assumption that folks already have, and I think Hugh mentioned this, but have some level of understanding because of how ubiquitous technology is in our lives. Now, one of the biggest issues, though, is that we have overabundance of information, and at our fingertips every single day, we have a choice on how we want to access that information. And because it's so easily accessible, oftentimes we fall into this constant cycle of just trying to navigate it without the knowledge or the skills to do so in a safe way, or even the language to understand exactly how we're engaging with different platforms. So when it comes to the participants in our programs, many of them, especially because of COVID and schools having to move to a virtual environment, were pushed into an arena that they had never before really experienced, which was, how do we use technology to fully engage students? How do we actually understand how to use this technology ourselves? A large portion of the folks that we work with are older or later in their careers. We're talking about folks who are in their mid to late 30s, early 40s, and up. And many of them haven't had the opportunity to build the skills or the understanding of how to adequately navigate technology. And I think that's just is something that is pervasive across our society and as at large, right? I don't think there's anything that's unique about our group of folks in the sense that they may lack those particular skills. It's just that it's not something that's necessarily prioritized. And I think it is because oftentimes we've started to view technology as a solution to everything, when in actuality it's a tool. And we should view it as a tool and understand how to safely implement it in situations that allow us to progress as a community, progress as a society. So for our folks, even hearing this research and learning about these particular perspectives is pushing my team and myself in a place to be really critical about our own approach to digital literacy and how we're training and supporting educators so that they're more competent in these areas and are able to become more self-aware of how they engage with technology, so that they then can also support students and parents and families, and also becoming more self-aware in how they engage with these technologies.
Yeah, that's definitely important. And it's so great that you mentioned, because in listening to you talk, it sounds like it would be in cases like that, that community engagement that Hugh mentioned it would be a perfect time to implement that, because of that idea of operating from a place of, well, it's technology, we all know technology, having that community engagement in process, like having structured practices in place could help fill up for those gaps in the place where, not everyone may know this. Having that community around you would definitely, I feel like, help those who aren't that aware. And that brings me to my next question for both of you. Like, what are ways that you think that we could increase community engagement to help fill in those gaps, or help those who, aren't that knowledgeable in terms of like digital and tech data usage?
Yeah, that's a great question. I appreciate you asking that. So, from my vantage point, and I use the example of a kindergarten classroom. I remember when I was in kindergarten, I had a teacher named Miss Bimal, and one of the things that she spent a significant amount of time doing is just like teaching us how to navigate the classroom and how to navigate the halls, right? And it wasn't seen as like, this foreign concept of, got to figure it out. It also wasn't seen as, well, kids have been in hallways before, in classrooms before, they know how to navigate it, right? In the same way that Ms. Bima would teach us how to navigate the classroom, the hallways in our school, etc. It's the way we have to start thinking about technology, right? I'm personally more of a proponent of seeing it as something that is woven into the multiple facets of our day-to-day work, our day-to-day lives, in the same way that, you wouldn't necessarily have a standalone class on how to navigate a classroom, right? But you would have it as part of a major part of the discussion at the start of a school year and constant reminders throughout the year. That's the way I think about technology, is like, how do we integrate it where this is just part of the way we set up our classrooms, or this is part of the way we set up our learning environments, where we're building a space where we can teach essentially into the processes and practices that keep us safe, that also make us more mindful about how we're engaging in the space. And then also having constant and routine reminders of like how we're showing up when we use these technological devices in the online space, right? And it becomes just something that's part of the routine, if you will, rather than something that is seen as, this big separate, tech giant, quote unquote, that is far removed from our day-to-day lives.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. I think it's also a good analogy, Carlin. I think one thing I would add is that as teachers sort of integrate this into their kind of curriculum and day-to-day activities, I think it's really important for the surrounding, school administrators and surrounding school staff to really support them in that, so that it's not, just looked at as like, oh, one more thing that teachers have to like study and like learn up on in their own time, because obviously teachers are super, super busy with all kinds of stuff. And so for school administrators who are, making it a priority for to integrate digital literacy kind of skills into their curriculum, being cognizant about, proactively incorporating that into, educators' professional development, having, opportunities for training and like knowledge sharing, I think is a really important ingredient as well, so that it doesn't fall entirely on, so that teachers are adequately supported from the rest of the institution to both develop their own skills and communicate that out to the students and their families, I think is really important.
Yeah, I think you both gave really great tips and information. I know we're getting close to our time, so I want to check the chat and see if there are any questions before we proceed. If you have any questions, please leave them in the chat. But I did have a question for Hugh, because I know the research that you guys did, and you mentioned that your research showed that educators of students with disabilities, they were better at using community engagement practices. I wanted to know, like, what do you think is the cause that led to that gap between educators of students with disabilities and those who don't teach students with disabilities?
It's a good question, and it's something that we've thought about. I'll say we don't have a definitive answer. I think that's something that we'd like to, continue to do more research on, to understand a little better. Um, I don't think it's a surprise that we saw increased community engagement practices, specifically in areas of data and technology use and privacy protection, amongst teachers who teach students with disabilities. I think this community of teachers has a lot of practice handling very sensitive information that both has kind of like additional legal sensitivities, as well as just, beyond that, information that is, is of high priority to keep private. And so I think that extra expertise really kind of translates to tools in the skill set for engaging students, as well as, parents, family members about that. which I think is kind of what contributes to what we see. And then I also would add that I think really helps to that a lot of these protections and these touch points between teachers and school community is formalized in kind of legal and institutional processes, things like IEP meetings, as well as, parents who are kind of proactively like reaching out. I think that that sort of there's a long history of institutional kind of touch points which really build out this spirit of community engagement.
And if you don't mind, I'd love to add to that. I appreciate that response, Hugh. One thing, and I want to focus more on like research and data, but one of the more fascinating things about research and data, I think oftentimes as a society, we see them as absolutes, right? Of like, because the data says this is the truth. This is the law, right? In actuality, what the data allows us to do based on what I've seen and what I've heard from you here is just allows us to ask better questions, right? So in this particular case, the thing I think is the greatest insight coming out of this is what are the questions that we can ask in order to further our understanding of this topic, right? Because there are a lot of things I think can be teased out of what the data is demonstrating. But again, I don't think it should be viewed as this is the end all be all, but rather a invitation to a deeper conversation about what does this mean, of a deeper investigation about where did this lead us, right? So I do appreciate this research and information because I do think it'll allow us to ask better questions about how do we proceed from here.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I feel like this topic and this discussion is simply just scratching the surface of a way bigger conversation that can come in the future. And it's like important that research like this is out there, so it's like Carlin said, it starts those conversations. It gets people asking more questions, allows us to dig deeper, because knowledge is power. The more we know, that's how we can shift things, that's how we make changes, that's how we continue to make education more equitable, more inclusive, more diverse. So yeah, I just wanted to thank you both. Thank you, Hugh from CDT. Thank you, Carlin from Equity Institute. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I hope you learned as much as I did, because I surely have learned a lot. And I really appreciated this conversation and speaking with you guys today.
Of course, it was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Carlin. It's good to chat with y'all.
Take care.
All right. Talk to y'all later.